Oui, donc je vais présenter Thomas en français, qui lui s'exprimera en anglais, et je pense qu'il n'aurait pas beaucoup de difficultés à hablar en castellano también. Alors Thomas, comme beaucoup de vous, a beaucoup de facettes et de manières de s'engager. Il est architecte. Il travaille professionnellement dans une agence belge qui s'appelle Agua, qui est très présente dans les architectures reconnues en Belgique. Il est par ailleurs enseignant et chercheur dans notre faculté, où il mène une recherche doctorale. Donc, il est à la fois enseignant dans les activités de projet, d'ateliers d'architecture, et d'autre part, il mène une recherche doctorale avec l'accompagnement de Cécile et de moi-même. Alors, depuis déjà un certain temps, parce que c'est une recherche doctorale qui s'étire dans le temps, parce qu'en fait, elle correspond à une occupation, à un quart-temps, quelque chose comme ça, vu les autres activités dont je viens de parler. Thomas a rencontré à plusieurs fois la question de la maquette. C'est évidemment une des raisons pour lesquelles on l'a sollicité aujourd'hui, mais aussi des problématiques qui touchent aux espaces de la mort, aux espaces et les rapports de certains espaces avec la transgression. Et alors, j'oublie un élément important, c'est que, entre autres, avec un certain nombre de partenaires de l'atelier Agua, il est impliqué dans un projet qui se développe avec une communauté en Amérique latine, au Salvador, une communauté et un lieu de mémoire par rapport à des répressions violentes qui ont eu lieu là-bas. Donc, Thomas est régulièrement présent en Amérique latine. Voilà. Vas-y, Thomas.
You're muted, Thomas.
Sorry. Merci, Jean, and thank you everybody for still being here. It's starting to get a little bit late, but that's all right. My presentation is a little bit dense, so maybe I will go a little bit quicker in certain moments. I will first start sharing it. Second. My apologies. Here we go. So, as Jean mentioned, you see my screen? Yes. You also see my mouse on the screen moving? Yes. Perfect. As Jean, excuse me. As Jean mentioned, there's many different things I do within a week, and my PhD also talks about many different things. The model was actually the starting point of one of my interests that I've thought about and worked with in different ways. And this time around, I wanted to do something a little bit more different that touches actually on a lot of elements that were discussed today. In a way, it's going to be the inverse movement of what Paolo just presented, in the sense that if we talk about precision and control, and for the last phrase really stuck with me, that in pre-Columbian architecture, the organization of matter is more important than the geometry, where I propose to talk about the Wittgenstein house, where geometry is absolutely everything. And I'm going to talk about order and disorder. I've made a model to investigate questions I've had about it. So the Wittgenstein house is an object of my interest for quite a long time. I remember the first time learning about it in courses in architectural history. I wrote about it a couple of times. And it is something that it's very austere. It's a very stern kind of architecture, but at the same time, it you could say simple or minimalistic, but I don't think it covers the architecture at all. There's something that slips from comprehensions at the same time. So there's always been something enigmatic to me about this building, that at once there's a lot of things I can understand, but at the same time, I'm not quite sure what is it that keeps me drawing back to this building. So it was built in Vienna, designed and built between 24 and 28. Started by Paul Engelmann, who was quite young at the time, a disciple of LOCI. And Wittgenstein later started being interested in it and acquired the rest of the project. And in one later letter, Engelmann admits that the project is no longer his, but belongs to Wittgenstein. The house was for Wittgenstein's sister, who, unlike him, did not give up her wealth. So the Wittgensteins were incredibly wealthy at the time. Their father was an important industrial. And here we see her in a wedding portrait painted by Gustav Klimt. I didn't know that this existed. I found it this week, so I decided to put it in. And so Engelmann starts designing, but in the style of LOCI, in the sense that it's interlocking volumes. It's kind of stripped from decoration, as LOCI in his popular pieces in journals at the time fulminated against continental European architecture filled with decor and like unnecessary elements, and kind of heralded Anglophone, Anglo-Saxon culture. This is also, it's a small detail, but her sister, the sister who was born as Margarete, changed her name to Margaret. Her husband, who's American, from Jewish descent, changed his name to Steinberger to Stoneborough. So it is these small elements to want it to be in vogue in a way. And so the plot is chosen. It's a southeastern plot in Vienna. You can also see by the size of the urban tissue that it is quite a project. So it takes up the space of an entire building block, but it doesn't inhabit the perimeters. It inhabits the center. And last year in October, I got to visit it for the first time during a trip with students. We went to Vienna and Venice in the framework of an architecture studio we organized in a master's degree. And afterwards, there was one realization or sensation or experience that stuck with me. And it's the following. So the center of the house seems to move with me as I move through the house. And it was like on top of the other fascinations I have for the object. But it struck me as peculiar because any other building I've visited, you know how far you are from a certain center or focal point of an architecture, or you know where you approach a periphery. You could say maybe a maze, a labyrinth does this too, but it does it in a different way, because in a labyrinth you use overall sight of where you are. You are completely in your own space. But here you know where you are, but the center, well, as I written down, it seems to move with you. So this is a first element. So this is the entrance hall, the kind of central piece from which the most important rooms, let's say on the ground floor, are accessible. Just to quickly situate it within his work, so I'm not a philosopher. I've read quite a bit of his work, but I think it's important to do, because in his first work that he finished in 1918 and he published in 21, which is the only work that was published during his life, it is a very kind of obsessional take in regards to philosophy as language. And later on, I've taken two here, collections of notes that appeared that were published after his death, seem to open up more to questions of doubt and hesitations, especially the last one, über Gewissheit, so uncertainty, is an inquiry on how we can make claims to know anything. And it's very different from the first one. And the first one states that philosophy should be aimed at the logical clarifications of thoughts. So a clear thought should be clearly expressed by proposition in logical language. Or in his own words, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. It's a quite famous quote, but it summarizes it. And it also shows a way of dealing with questions of philosophy in a very strict manner. So that which cannot be expressed in logical language does not exist. So even at this point, we talked about temporality earlier, the passage of time, according to his work, is not able to be expressed by logical language, so it does not exist. So this was a point of view he had. Later, he contradicts and he starts opening up. And the point is that what I want to make is that how situates itself after the first work and between all the other nodes. So the house did something to his thinking. And so this is a series of elements. So the philosophical work is he aims to head straight to the thing itself. And as I just said, the clarity of thought comes through clarity of language. But of course, when you do an architecture project, it implies approximations, not only on the building side, where things will be executed more or less the way things were designed, but also even the designing itself, the conceiving of space itself. This is the second point, how do we know when we're designing that you move towards a point of clarity? Or how do you know that the conceived space, the space you have in mind, the space you draw or make in a model, will be right or just according to your image? And this is the problem, the problem of intuition, and intuition comes into play. We have to act, we have to build something, so we do something. And this enters the question of measure, which he understood as laying a picture, an idea against reality. So what happens is that in the preparation work, he would always formalize a certain picture, certain idea, a vision for a space, and measure it against the reality. And also it's known from the construction phase, for example, that workers would hold up elements. So there would be something on the construction, they would hold up elements, a steel bar, and he would measure by eye if it was just or not, which made the construction phase extremely difficult. But it is, again, this moving towards a point of clarity that is so important within his frame of thought. And so I am stuck with this experience. The center of the house seems to move with me as I move through the house, and I want to investigate it. And I thought for the seminar, it could be interesting to reconstruct parts, the most important parts, in a model, but not to take the existing plans, but to base it on memory. And I allow myself 2 pictures, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, which means that my intuition, my memory of the place, of course I've studied the object as well, but it's mostly memory from visiting the place. I put my intuition fully at play. Excuse me. And so the thinking happened, the conceiving of the space happens as I build the model, which is extremely different from how I normally, mostly as a practitioner, approach a model. Often we make a sketch, we quickly translate it in first dimensions, then we start making the model. So the model is almost always a translation of 2D to 3D, and it's almost never an instant engagement between my body and a miniature. This is also something you just talked about, Paolo. With that, I think it's important to notice that I think there is an irreducible quality of the model, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think, in one of the questions rounds, is for me, it embodies the potentiality of architectural space that is caught between concept and tangible space. So what I mean by that is, when we perceive a model, we project our bodies into it, we understand dimensions, but at the same time, we're thrown out of it, again, because we understand that we cannot inhabit the model. So it's this kind of going back and forth between an idea and a reality, which makes it possible to move towards a point of clarity. And so a kind of sub-question could be, what happens if spaces are thought directly within the model? As a quick side note, it also reminds me of the work by the artist Mike Kelly, which he called Educational Complex, which is a series of models he made based on his memory and a series of pictures of schools he attended. So the subject of the work is the kind of traumatic experiences of American high schools. And it becomes this kind of landscape with features of schools that we understand, but also the connection between the spaces are impossible. So it's kind of an impossible architecture that, and it's the same kind of modus operandi that I propose. So I take these two pictures, the kind of iconic picture from the street and the central space. I started without the pictures, and it was too difficult. So I allowed myself a starting point. So I begin, and for example, here, the pictures also very quickly disappeared from my table because I had a starting point. So the starting point here is the first row of columns, the stairs, and this kind of wall that goes up until, I don't know, 30, 40-ish centimeters. And what happens is, it was of course, you're just seeing pictures right now. It would have been also quite interesting to put us all right now around this model. It's very different when I had to take pictures, of course. But the sensation of just cutting foam, and kind of by intuition, going to a point of where I thought it was just is, I've never made a model like this. So it was quite a peculiar sensation for me. And I continue. So I finished the first space that I thought was kind of squarish. And I know that there were 4 spaces around it. So we've got a dining space, a kind of larger reception room, music room, a smaller living space. And this is, I think, a wardrobe toilet. And this phrase underneath it is kind of like the process when I put myself in that position. So it's really, it's not about, I cannot measure something exactly. So the form that I cut out is derived from my perception of proportions, which is very different from how I normally make models. So I continue. I have these columns. I have a first dimension, width, and well, the 2 horizontal directions. And then, of course, the height and the openings come in. And then I move on to the spaces around it. And I remember that every space had their own rhythm of openings. And I also remember at first glance thinking that doors and windows kind of seem very similar, but if you look into it, they are all very different. And so, for example, in this space, the dining room space, you enter here on the edge. And I remember that all the other openings were the same. So this is the first kind of, I've cut many white elements, testing different openings. And this is the one I thought was more or less right. And I do this, and this is the part from the outside. And I do this for every space. So this is the longer room. I remember that from the central room, you also go to the edge of the space, but in the other space, you are in the middle of it. And the door you came through, which is behind us here in the picture, has the same dimensions as the first window. And then there must be 2 others because this is what the object wants. And this is again from the outside. And so I do that for every space. This is the first collection of proportions and of openings of light. I do have to admit that I made abstraction more or less of the height of the rooms, which actually is a colossal mistake, but whatever. It's a process, it's a working model. And from the outside, it's quite different. Like from the outside, all of a sudden, because you're not in the room, you're not living the proportions of the room, there is a similarity, but also the changes are less clear. We don't know really why they are so different. So you only understand from the inside, and the outside is just simply the result of it. Then there's another element I remember being quite important, the floors. And the floor plan is quite peculiar. It's black stone, and you think it's continuous, but it's actually continuous in the sense that it's the same pattern everywhere, but it's the opposite. So I remember joints being aligned with doors and walls, always arriving in the middle of an element. So here, I don't know the brightness of your screens, but you can see that, well, I'll take the next picture, it's a bit better. You can see, for example, that the joint between the stones arrives in the middle of the door here. It arrives in the middle of the column. It arrives in the middle of the door here. About these columns, I wasn't too sure, so I put it on the edge. And of course, there's too many lines, too many joints to remember. And it doesn't really matter. I can only remember the principle. And it means that every space has its own order when it comes to the floor plan. And this is what happens. So, for example, in the dining room, I draw a line in the middle and then just partition the rest. And I do that for every space. And of course, you can kind of see it in this picture. For this door that allows you to go to the music room, from the entrance room, the line is in the middle, but in the room itself, the joint is in the middle of the wall. So this means that there are discontinuities. And it means that the threshold of every door bridges the discontinuity. So passing through a door is changing into a new order. And then I assemble everything. And there's a clear order, and there's also a clear disorder. There's a unity, and I'm not quite sure what it depends on. And the central space is this kind of hinge that has a clear axis, as every room does. There's always a dominant wall. And then we have every space around it with their own conditions. And none of them are symmetrical. You think they are symmetrical, but for example, if you take this space, we could draw an axis of symmetry here, but then there's a door here and there's none there. Here, the same thing. So there's always a small element of exception that is quite precisely designed, I would say. And this is about passing from one space to another. So now I put the dining room next to the central room. You arrive on the corner. And yeah, this is repeating what I just said. So it's every room has this focus or this apparent symmetry, but then it allows for necessary variations. And from the outside, again, it's way less clear. Like it's a kind of diffused result that is just accepted in the facade. Just a quick remark between the work that Engelmann did and Wittgenstein did. On the left, we see a part of the fragment of the plan of the central space by Engelmann, and you can see that it is very different from what Wittgenstein does. There are two circular columns. Sometimes columns protrude into this space, sometimes they don't. And Wittgenstein is very clear. It's like, no, every column must be affirmed, but then is cut into different proportions by their relative position. So the central columns are completely visible, but then the ones on the sides, it's only half of them, and the one of the corners is only a quarter of them. So he literally forces the material into his idea, but which also means that there's a kind of evenness in the space that has a strong axis, which is of course the direction of the stairs. Which then brings me to the question of point of view. So the order of each space that comes through proportion, the doors, the floors, the materials, the axes, generates a kind of rigidity or coolness of the spaces, coolness as in coldness. And the order is so strong that you're immersed in it. Also, the height of the space does that as well. And it generates a kind of unawareness or oubli de soi, we could say. But at the same time, there are these distorting elements. So the way the rooms are organized around the central space, but also, for example, the floor plan, the floor tiles per space, distort this pure symmetry. So, and together with yourself moving through the space, because the first order is so strong, it generates a margin. So you very clearly sense whenever you are in line with the carefully designed point of view and when you aren't. And it gives you perhaps the sensation of being a or the focal point, like in the space. And this brings me to some notes he wrote on perspective and point of view in this posthumously published book. And he says, nothing could be more remarkable than seeing someone who thinks himself unobserved, engaged in some quite simple everyday activity. We should be seeing life itself, but then we do so every day, and it does not make the slightest impression on us. But true enough, we don't see it from that point of view. And a work of art compels us, one might say, to see it in the right perspective. But without art, the object is a piece of nature like any other. And the fact that we may exult through it through our enthusiasm does not give anyone the right to display it to us. So here, and of course, it's debatable what a right perspective is. I think we could also say that it is contingent, but it's a very clear point of view on this idea that the everyday activity and feeling unobserved is a remarkable quality. And so we could say that the artist or architect puts the object, the inhabitant, I'm not sure, in the right point of view. And another phrase of his in the same collection is that architecture immortalizes and glorifies something. And so this passing through space, going from one order to another, we could say glorifies the everyday, or it glorifies someone who thinks himself unobserved, engaged in some quite simple everyday activity. So I think this is perhaps a quality, a specific spatial quality of the house. Yeah, I'm going to gloss over this. Of course, there's a question of furniture because the house was inhabited at one point, not for not very long. And there's this idea of stringency or coldness that, of course, he allowed furniture in the rooms, but he didn't allow any rugs or curtains, for example, nothing that would hide the order, which leads to the question of sometimes we do need a room to be a bit darker. And so he invented, this is me pulling it up, he invented these steel curtains that you can, with this metal thing, you can pull out with counterweights and you pull it up. So it's also to show how relentless he sought after technical details. And this goes for radiators, door handles, everything. So a couple of afterthoughts, I will conclude. The question of variation. So we could also say, since the order of every space is so specific that the house is a collection of very specific stringent rooms, each with their own order, and creating this order between them. So the internal mechanics are clear, and can we do any variations? So on the left, you see the house as it is, or my reproduction of it, and on the right, a variation. So for example, in the existing one, you also have these diagonal axes that are quite perfectly possible. And in the variation, the same thing happens, weirdly enough. So this diagonal line keeps arising. So the combination is different, the overall shape is different, but is the overall composition then maybe relative? Is this then still the Wittgenstein house? Is it something else? I'm not sure. We can continue this exercise, of course. He has two others. I did many more, but I won't bore you with that. And then a closing thought about scale. So this is a quote from Carrez in conversation with Martin Steinman about the scales of reality. And so he talks about the scale 1 to 33, which comes from the theater. And he says it's a scale that allows you to look through a house. And it's the relation between inside and outside spaces. And I think this 1 to 33 is where this bodily confrontation with this space, with the object, is extremely strong. And weirdly enough, because I couldn't help myself, I measured some elements of the model, and I checked it with some afterwards. Checked it with some measures on the plans, and I arrived between 1 to 31 and 1 to 36. So perhaps 1 to 33, which means that intuitively I've used this scale, which then it's a very open reflection I had at the very end. Is Dom Hans van der Laan's experiment, from which he derived the plastic number with the pebbles. So if you ask somebody to make categories of sizes of pebbles, everybody will categorize them per group, and the difference per group is 4 to 3. So there's something with this third that that relates to our bodies, to our dexterity, to the object that we can think with. That was my contribution. Thank you for sticking with me.
Thank you, Thomas. Anyone would like to comment or any questions?
I have a question. Can I
Yes,
ask
please.
a question? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas, for this presentation. It's very interesting. I have two questions. One is the height of the ceilings. I don't think you can forget about that. So it's part of the proportions of things. So I don't know, think about it. Maybe it's a 1/3 scale. That's fine, huh? Maybe. And the other question is more theoretical. It's more about the idea of Gegenstand and the inhabitant. You seem to oppose them, the object and the inhabitant. And in what measure would, for Wittgenstein, would the inhabitant be an object?
Okay, I agree with the ceiling issue, but it's more to say that I more or less took the same height of walls for the spaces, and then applied proportion through perception. But of course, it gives a how can I say this? It doesn't allow the full experimentation in a way. And the other question, I'm not quite sure if I opposed the two. I think the quote about the point of view, the artist and the object, I think what happens, I think, is that the object, you could either say, I think it works both ways. I think you could either say that the right point of view is that the object, that the house is itself, that moving through it must allow the observer to see it in a right way. And the other reflection I had is that perhaps and this has to do with the experience I had with the center moving with you through the house, is that perhaps the inhabitant becomes the object. And I'm not quite sure how to see that from Wittgenstein's lens himself, but I think both are possible thoughts.
Well, I would just respond that I think we as architects often think of the inhabitant as an object. And that's not a problem because we're all objects, all of us are objects. But the idea of Gegenstand is really interesting to me because standing over against it, it has kind of Heideggerian resonance. And this is the idea that the inhabitant is part of the house, but is also part of the sort of the furniture of the house. And I think that's interesting. And then I just wanted to add a Doctor Who resonance. Do you know Doctor Who?
A little bit, but not very well.
Well, what is often said about Doctor Who's his telephone box where he travels through the universe is that it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And I think that's something that's very true about Wittgenstein's house. And it's again a question of scale. It's just, I mean, it's kind of a joke, but it's not really a joke because the question of what the inside is to us is to put in proportion with what the outside is to us. You understand what I mean? So, yeah. So I mean, the way we perceive things is maybe different depending on when we're on the inside or on the outside.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you.
Je vais faire une petite remarque.
Vas-y.
Oui. On dit toujours le diable est dans les détails. Ici, c'est le bon Dieu qui est dans les détails parce qu'il y a une chose dont tu ne parles pas. Et je pense que c'est ce qui est le plus fascinant, c'est l'accastillage, la maison, la quincaillerie. Tous les détails sont proprement incroyables. Les profils, je regarde ici un bouquin qui est une somme sur le bâtiment. Je regarde les gonds, les fixations des portes, blocage des portes, la machinerie de l'ascenseur, enfin, tout est tout à fait incroyable. au point que je me demandais même si c'est pas en fait donc ceux qui habitent d'abord le bâtiment, puisque maintenant il est vide manifestement, il est visitable mais vide, et ceux qui habitent en premier le bâtiment, quand on voit les photos, c'est en fait les châssis, les détails. Je veux dire, c'est un peu comme tout à l'heure on parlait d'Alberti. Alberti constitue ces murs par les pilastres, par les bandeaux de pierre grise et tout ça. Et ici, c'est la même chose avec les châssis. Enfin, si on imagine retirer les châssis, tout tombe par terre, quoi. Mais quand je dis tombe par terre, je veux dire, les murs ne suffisent pas à se tenir tout seuls, je veux dire, à se manifester tout seuls. Et même les colonnes, on retire les châssis, il n'y a plus rien, en fait. Donc, je trouve ça assez incroyable comme bâtiment où c'est une clenche de porte qui fabrique la présence, presque pour aller à l'inverse de David, la présence des habitants et dans ce détail. Et alors, il y a quand même quelques vues, il y a quand même parfois des rideaux.
Oui.
Par contre, le mobilier est strict, ça c'est vrai, mais en fait, il y a quand même une présence, il y a quelques photos avec des personnes qui habitent dedans, ou en tout cas qui s'y trouvent à ce moment-là. Et il y a ce décalage énorme entre la manière de s'habiller, la manière d'être, le mobilier fait de courbes et contre-courbes, et cette maison quasi mathématique enfin, pas qui nie, mais qui accueille un monde qui n'est pas le sien, quoi. Et alors, juste une dernière chose, ce qui est intéressant par rapport à, tu travailles, je trouve ça fascinant ce que tu as fait avec la maquette. Il y a juste une question, c'est le sol en fait. Parce que partout ici, le sol est gris très foncé, mais jamais noir, sauf peut-être dans le hall d'entrée. Là, il est franchement noir. Donc, il y avait ça. Et alors, une dernière chose, c'est que manifestement, elle a été conçue fondamentalement par le dessin, par axonométrie. Il y a une tripotée de dessins d'axonométrie, donc un peu ce que tu dis, quoi, la recherche du désordre des volumes vers l'ordre des volumes. Mais il n'y a pas de maquette, il n'y a que des petits axonos tout plein. Je trouve que c'est quelque chose d'intéressant aussi qu'un volume aussi complexe puisse être travaillé le crayon en plus pas très précis. Parce
oui, tout à fait.
Il y a les dessins de construction après, hein, mais les dessins de recherche manifestement sont presque dans l'imprécision. Voilà, je voulais juste faire remarquer ça, mais je suis comme toi, il faut que j'aille la voir parce que c'est un bâtiment qui m'a toujours fasciné et parfois on peut se demander pourquoi. Mais c'est vrai que c'est incroyable comme édifice.
Perhaps just oui, avec plaisir. Just to perhaps quickly react to your last comment. I agree with what you say. There's so many other elements, and of course, as I quickly mentioned when I was talking about the curtains, everything that is more precise technicalities. He as an engineer felt more had more capacity to really tackle those elements. But your last remark about the house being conceived in drawing and axonometries, that's very true. There's no models during the process, but what happens on the construction site is that he, for example, in the dining room, after completion, he forces the contractor to take the ceiling out to lower it 30 millimeters. And this happens all the time. So during the construction site, he's kind of using the house as a one-to-one model that he can just shape according to his ideas. So it's true that there wasn't a model during conceiving, but afterwards there's a different.
Tout à fait. Merci.
Are 30 millimeters?
Yes.
3 centimeters.
Yeah, that is a little bit more than an inch, no?
Oh my
Yes.
God.
Yeah.
Okay, it was just a question, but that seems incredible to me. Okay.
Paulo?
Thank you, Thomas, for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. But first, first to make some comments, I wanted to ask you if your interest or your PhD thesis is interested in the project itself, or the project is just okay to think other things, and in this sense, what is a question already, and what is the use you make of this experience of the models? Yes.
Yeah, I think, and I think that's why the afterthoughts are more about reassembling and questions about scale and I think it was more a personal obsession, you could say, this house for me, and I think thinking about the model, just applying it to something so I think it's more the model making or the question of the model than the house itself, but it's a good subject to, it's a good object, Gegenstand to.
Because I really like and find very interesting the way in which you have used the idea of the model to think, as you said, no, to think about the project, to think about architecture, and to go on thinking, no. I really found it very, very, very useful in a way, no. But in this idea of in that sense, I have many observations and maybe a question, like if you have thought about doing the same with a not so clearly, so easily written project, because I sometimes have questioned this idea of precision, because it's obvious that there is an obsession with precision, but we don't not always discuss the precision with what, because when you see the integrity of a column being dissolved in order to let the general instruction, or the general mathematician reading of the space, because it seems to me like it's not the precision with the objects, it's the precision through the object to make readable geometrically the space. And in some text about the Wittgenstein house, I have found many times that this idea of precision alludes to a certain consistency with the objects, but I think the objects are soldiers of another war, no? Even though they are very, very close. And in that sense, I was wondering what would it be the result of the same exercise with making models with an object that would be more difficult to read in terms of dimensions or the mathematics of the space or the result, no. That, and also I think we share with Gary this fanatism. I don't know if it's a fanatism, but apart from me thinking of Wittgenstein, it's inevitable to think on the word of Jan Turnovsky and what he can read, or what he extracts from the experience of the house. No, that just that. Really, really nice job.
Thank you, and thank you for your remarks. It's an interesting point to kind of like ask oneself like the precision, but for what, to what extent, for which to which ends in a way. Because at the same time, you could also argue that the position of Wittgenstein as an architect is untenable. Like it's quite insane to think of architecture like that. But at the same time, and this is why it is enigmatic, I think there's certain qualities that arise that are singular. And about your other question, how to think about this way of using the model, I think that's a really fair question, because also making the model based on memory, remembering different things, but also knowing that the deviations, the variations that create a disorder are within a family of set parameters, right? So in that way, it's quite a generous object to do this exercise with. So that's a very fair question. I personally, after finishing the model, thought of the starting point using the pictures, for example, to go more to a textual approach. So also maybe a little bit what Marianne and, excuse me, Nicolas? Yeah, talked about, is to have this picture or an idea of a space, or maybe not even like outside of the architectural canon, right? And then trying to sculpt it purely on a piece of text or a thought, to get completely away from any, because I think that would put you in even in a more extreme position whilst making the model. So this is a thought I had.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to comment that the remark I made at the end of the presentation, and with this hypothesis of Jean-Pierre Croce of the imprecision of the Inca architecture in terms of dimensions or angles, but there is always a way to find precision, because architects need precision to communicate the building of a building. No? You need to, there is some kind of, at least I think there is an architect in the process. No? So, but what I haven't said, that he suggests that the way to instruct the architecture, that has made me think of your process, is it's verbal, it's related to the units, because he thinks that the general plan is like a system, it's another system, but every room has its rule in a, for instance, to say it's a room of 3 for 2 niches. So the reading of the space is also precise. You have 3 for 2 niches that organize the reading of the space and the communication of how to build it up. No? And that made me think that, thought that every system has the space for precision in communication, or the way of establish what make it an ordered space of a informal space. No? And there is not always, like in Inca or the comparison, there is always something to put together, especially in the process you have made that makes more evident this silly idea of Aljati of dividing the architects between dividers and composers. And he obviously loved dividers, but clearly Wittgenstein is a composer, no?
Yes.
Which is that for me has been always very interesting about the Wittgenstein case. No, its decision of making this complex, the structure of architecture. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Et pour la petite histoire, tu dis que Wittgenstein est un compositeur. Son frère était pianiste et avait perdu un bras, le bras droit, je crois. Et il a fait composer des compositions au piano pour le bras gauche. Et il est resté donc il avait perdu à la guerre, pendant la guerre 14-18. et il est resté un grand pianiste connu internationalement pour l'histoire.
Oui, merci.
Bah alors, c'est un diviseur aussi parce qu'il s'est divisé entre le bras droit et le bras gauche.
Nicolas, please.
Yeah, just to follow on, just something I was thinking. Well, we kept repeating the word precision for a while, because I think it's very interesting every time we talk about precision, especially in architecture, to start looking for the elements that allow for this precision to be acted out in a building. Usually we have a series of, we have developed a series of details that allow for us to perceive a certain precision. And to look for these strategies of achieving precision can be a very interesting, I don't know, approach when we think of models, because we always need elements that correct some distortions. And usually things that are very precise require some flexible details that correct the displacements that that necessarily occur when we build something, which I think is a very interesting side of when we talk about something that needs to acquire a certain precision.
I think in that way, it's very interesting that a remark on the William Flusser on architecture, saying we can argue the base, but I like the sentences that architecture is the most anti-cultural, hyper-cultural, because when you build up a wall just in bricks, she says immediately the humans make plaster on it because they cannot resist the order of only of contractions. They need to establish a more readable order of it. It's an order that is not its guts. No? Even this if it's very close to it, maybe just the 2 millimeters plaster that makes the readability of the object. No? But I think that is very present in Wittgenstein House, and I don't know how does it work for Europeans, because coming from Peru, we are very used to naked structures, no? Because of in Lima, no, not in Peru, in Lima, no. Because of the climate, we are not used to everything that comes after the brick or after concrete, no. For us, after the brick, after the concrete, sometimes plaster, and that's it, no. So, and this house tries to show itself very naked, even though it's so much draw that it's at the end is very dressed. You know, it's like a Mies van der Rohe column, which I don't know why we are taught that is the pure construction, and it's really close to a Russian puppet, but not in the way that Jan showed us last year. That is identical one on another, but it's different. Each one, each puppet is different from the other until you get the technically correct and the readable correct. No, and it's very interesting.
Je peux faire une remarque à ce sujet-là, au sujet de la précision, particulièrement de la précision sur chantier, on va dire. C'est au point que les entreprises, en Belgique en tout cas, l'expérience, je le sais, ça peut amener jusqu'à des procès parce qu'en fait, ils ont négocié ce que les architectes ne savent pas forcément, des tolérances admissibles avec les autorités gouvernementales. Hein. Donc, ça veut dire que si on ne respecte pas ces tolérances, si on est à un point de précision absolument mathématique, on se met en difficulté vis-à-vis du monde de la construction. Et un autre aspect, c'est que, par exemple, la précision est plus grande à l'intérieur qu'à l'extérieur. Donc, tout ce qui est élévation est moins précise dans les obligations de l'entreprise que ce qui est finition intérieure. Ce qui va pas. À un moment, si ça se rejoint, c'est la catastrophe. Mais c'est marrant à observer, parce que nous, on parle théoriquement de précision, mais ce n'est pas que théorique, c'est vraiment un sujet profond pour tout qui construit. Et alors, le BIM et tout ça est infiniment précis, donc quelle marge de manœuvre laisse-t-on à l'architecte comme à l'entrepreneur par rapport à cette précision qui, de toute façon, est indépassable dans les logiciels informatiques.
But it's I still, sorry, Thomas, I cannot stop talking. No, but I think this idea of the precision is also on the reader. I mean, maybe there is no more precise architecture than the traditional Japanese architecture. But then there is a reader that understands irregularity, for us, irregularity, as precision. Precision is in other space. It's not in symmetry. You read precision in another way, I think less contradictory from the construction. No, I think the Greek, the Roman or the Renaissance is the classic for the contradiction between the build and the read, and what you read and what you build. There is a lot of instruments to get them close, but it's clearly different, separate. But in traditional Japanese architecture, you see that is very, very close. You see construction in its logic, and you read it very close to the logic of, and you see that precision. So some asymmetries, etc., are ways of precision. Thank you, Thomas.
Oui, Thomas, je voulais te remercier pour le travail que tu viens de réaliser avec ce travail en maquette. Et ce que je trouve vraiment, vraiment très, très intéressant, et ça renvoie à la présentation de Paolo sur, à ce rapport qu'il pourrait y avoir entre les maquettes qui sont faites d'édifices réels, rapport qui tenterait de mettre un peu à l'épreuve la réalité, de se dire, tiens, cette réalité qu'on habite, si on la pervertissait un peu ou si on la présentait autrement via une maquette, qu'est-ce que ça donnerait? Et donc, ce qui était intéressant, c'est que tu dis, voilà, j'ai été dans le bâtiment, j'ai habité le bâtiment, je me suis promenée dedans et j'avais l'impression que le centre du bâtiment se déplaçait avec moi. Et donc, avec ça dans la tête, tu commences à te faire cette maquette. Et en fait, ce que je trouve génial, c'est que la maquette que toi, tu as faite, elle attire notre attention à tous, mais elle attire en premier sur tout ce qui a attiré ton attention à toi quand tu étais dans le bâtiment. Donc, en fait, tout ce que tu nous as montré, ça nous dit pourquoi toi, tu as eu l'impression que le centre du bâtiment bougeait avec toi. Parce que tu nous montres l'équilibre des ouvertures dans les murs, donc le fait qu'à chaque fois qu'on pénètre dans une nouvelle pièce, on a cette sensation d'être de nouveau au centre de quelque chose. Donc l'équilibre des ouvertures, tu as commencé par ça. Et puis la division du sol par les lignes de carrelage, donc le fait que les seuils, c'est chaque fois des franchissements qui remettent un peu les compteurs à zéro, comme ça, parce que tout à coup, les lignes de carrelage ne se correspondent pas, il n'y a pas de continuité. Et puis, il y a les enfilades, là, les perspectives qui s'accrochent chaque fois sur les bords des murs. Donc, on a des espèces de transversalités obliques qui font qu'on n'est pas dans des axes de composition avec des orthogonalités. On est chaque fois sur des transversalités. Et donc, en fait, toutes les choses que tu nous montres, ça nous dit à quel point le centre de la maison se déplace. Et c'est pour ça que tu n'as pas du tout parlé de ce dont Frédéric parlait, tous les petits détails de châssis, le fait que ces châssis ont une présence tellement forte qu'ils ont presque l'air plus structurants que les murs. Parce que ce n'est pas ça que toi, tu as accroché. Ce n'est pas ça qui a attiré ton attention quand tu étais sur place, puisque toi, ce que tu étais en train de vivre, c'était ce déplacement. Et donc, ce qui est super, c'est que cette maquette, elle témoigne de certaines choses. Et c'est certaines choses qui t'ont impacté directement, mais quelqu'un d'autre aurait fait sans doute d'autres choix au niveau de… Donc, en fait, la maquette, c'est vraiment penser… En fait, tu as repensé le bâtiment via une maquette. Tu as repensé le bâtiment via une maquette. Et c'est pour ça qu'après, tu peux déplacer les pièces un peu comme tu veux, et ça ne change rien pour toi. Puisque de toute façon, tous les dispositifs qui ont eu du sens pour toi sont toujours là, sont toujours opérants. Je trouve ça vraiment pas mal du tout.
Oui, tout à fait.
Je rebondis sur cette question de la précision des mesures et la question du sentiment d'être toujours au centre en se déplaçant. Moi, je n'ai pas perçu qu'elles ont un lien l'une avec l'autre. Je pense qu'il y a moyen de très bien imaginer une maison comme celle-là où effectivement le centre est toujours là où on se trouve soi, c'est-à-dire qu'il y en a vraiment énormément. Mais que ce n'est pas la conséquence de l'application d'une obsession sur une exactitude de mesure. Enfin, il me semble que c'est deux questions disjointes l'une par rapport à l'autre.
Oui, tout à fait disjointes.
Il se fait que l'auteur en question, le compositeur ou le diviseur, effectivement, il semblait être raccroché sur ce genre de questions, mais il est probablement habité par cette question-là, alors qu'il n'était probablement pas par celle que toi tu as vécue, que j'imagine que les personnes qui ont vécu dans cette maison ressentent aussi, sans pas nécessairement le nommer. Parce que, ta façon de nommer la chose, tu nous as expliqué ça il y a quelques semaines, j'avais l'impression d'être toujours au centre. On connaît beaucoup de choses sur la villa Wittgenstein, moi je n'ai jamais été, mais je n'avais jamais entendu dire ça. Donc tu as mis les mots sur une expérience qui a été la tienne et qui est probablement aussi celle que partagent d'autres personnes, sans la nommer de la même façon. Et donc, c'est ça, me semble-t-il, l'apport le plus important. Et il se fait que Wittgenstein a produit ça sans même le savoir, probablement. Mais bon, en appliquant certaines stratégies, celles que Cécile vient de rappeler maintenant, ça a produit cet effet-là.
Oui, tout à fait. Dans ce sens-là, le défi était aussi à double tranchant. C'était aussi la volonté d'être curieux, de vouloir faire une maquette qui ne vient pas d'un document 2D. Ça, c'est une chose. Et l'autre chose, c'est quelque part de traduire cette narration personnelle, comme Cécile le dit, en espace. Et donc, c'était tellement différent de réfléchir l'espace et faire des maquettes que d'habitude. Et voilà, c'était ça l'exercice.
Et pour je vais pas dire pour l'anecdote, mais pour la petite histoire, donc le travail que tu viens de faire ici avec une maquette à l'intuition, entre guillemets, c'est quelque chose que tu viens de faire et qui n'est pas dans les procédures de recherche qui sont les tiennes dans le cadre de ta recherche. C'est quelque chose de nouveau que tu as fait là. Tu y as mis il n'y a pas très longtemps, si je ne me trompe. Et donc, c'est vraiment une invention que tu as faite en souhaitant rencontrer les questions qui sont celles qu'on a mis en avant, celles de la fabrication de la maquette dans le cadre du séminaire. Et tu t'es dit, ben oui, moi, je vais fabriquer une maquette pour essayer de comprendre quelque chose à propos de cette maison-là. Et je trouve ça à la fois une richesse d'invention, une pertinence d'invention et une rigueur. Tu es un chercheur, tu réponds à un truc, on te dit, ça t'intéresse de participer à ça, la thématique, c'est ça, et voilà, tu le fais. Vraiment, c'est très agréable.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Jean.
Juste te poser une question, quelle est la technique que tu as utilisée pour la maquette?
J'ai pris de la mousse blanche et j'ai coupé avec un fil chaud. Yes, also the technique, it is, I kind of thought this idea of sculpting was important, and I love working with plaster, but plaster has the problem that you have to make the mold, so it takes too much time to test proportions. So the white foam was the best option because you can just slice a bit if you deem it too big, or you can start over. It's easy. So, and yeah, which is also this question of precision. I kind of agree with you, Jean, that I personally don't think that the house depends on the extreme precision in a way, personally. But it's also, that also comes from my personal experience as an architect. The first office I collaborated with, freshly out of uni, the details that we made were very conceptual and didn't allow any margin, zero margin, which led to horrific experiences on the building side, of course, because if it's a bit what you said, Nicolas, like it's, if the margin is zero, how are you going to deal with the reality? And in that office, for example, we weren't going to budge in the direction of the contractor. So the contractor just had to start over and start over until they got it right. And the office I work for right now, Agua, it's just a completely different way. It's actually even almost coming up with a detail and allowing approximations to happen on building site. And I think that's a very different way of thinking about architecture, thinking about matter and details. And it forces you as an architect to put yourself in a position of what is actually central, or what do I want to do with this project if it doesn't depend on that, if it doesn't depend on that. So it's a different mode of thinking as well. Just to respond to the precision discussion.
Ok, voy a hacer un last remark, Gary, disculpa. No, just a phrase and we got that. No, because I was just wondering how important it is for your experience through the model to have concluded this idea of each space related to the center, because that can have the risk to become a program for a project of a model, and not necessarily the discovery of what happens through the model. But I think that's the kind of thing that, as constructions, are impossible to foreclose. That's part of you, and it's a conclusion your body made. But I'm not sure is that the. But I think the model confirms or make it. Can help to relativize this first conclusion, and I think the game with the rooms was part of a very open process that I really enjoyed. I must close the event. Excuse me, Thomas, but thank you all to stay together till this moment, in which the discussion has warmed up, and now I'm more enthusiastic about the future seminars to come. See you on Friday.
Merci, c'était très, très agréable. Et vous allez commencer votre après-midi, nous allons commencer notre soirée.
Exactement. Vendredi.
Au revoir tout le monde.
See you Friday.
Vendredi.